Hey everybody, welcome to Deeper Sync. Thanks for joining. Today we have Ryan Merritt, Chief Product Officer at DeepSync. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you for having me.
So I've got a whole ton of questions I want to get through with you, but before we do, I would love to hear a little bit about you, a little about your history, what brought you to DeepSync. Tell us who you are, Ryan.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I actually started my career in the digital advertising space in mergers and acquisitions. So that was at LiveRamp. It was a cool way to kind of get the 10,000-foot view of the space, learn all the crazy acronyms we have. After that, I moved pretty quickly into product management. It was a good fit for me because it was a good...
At LiveRamp?
At LiveRamp.
Okay.
Yep. A good mix of kind of the data and the technical, but also the business and the strategy. And so worked in a product capacity at LiveRamp for, another 4 years, did everything from identity, digital identity and mapping files to measurement and measurement enablement. And then I actually took a break from digital ads and worked at a company called Redfin, the real estate brokerage, in data acquisition, kind of leading their national expansion strategy. Got to work with a great team of folks there, opening up additional listings, opening up the US basically on the Redfin website. And then I started at DeepSync about 1.5 years ago. And I lead our product team and excited to be here.
All right. I like it. Well, I love the fact you also didn't mention that you went to Stanford.
Yeah.
So
I did not mention that.
You probably didn't want to mention that, but
it's okay.
Big brain, Ryan's got a big brain. So we got Stanford, we've got LiveRamp, we've got Redfin, DeepSync. And being in charge of products, I would just be curious, with that variety of types of products that you've worked with, like what makes a great product?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, for me, it's very simple. I think what makes a great product is solving an actual user problem or need, creating value for your customers, and making that value and that product accessible. And I think there's a lot of subcategories and things that roll up to those, things like user experience, but holistically, I think if you can nail those three things, it really sets you up for success and you have a great product in your hands.
Okay. So when you came to DeepSync 1.5 years ago, right?
Yep.
How did you begin to look at those things through the world of what DeepSync is? Because it's a wholly different, yes, Redfin I'm sure has a bazillion terabits of data or whatever, but how do you compare when you came to DeepSync, the what you just outlined, how did you make that reality? Where did you start? What did you do there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what's particularly unique about DeepSync and what stood out to me is, number one, this foundational data asset that we have, which, rooted in direct mail quality data, just this extremely accurate, deterministic data set that I saw as a huge opportunity. And I think DeepSync has and did have at that time a lot of fantastic products that help our customers as brands and advertisers and, other folks in the data industry find the right segments or target audiences that they want to work with. But for me, one of the most exciting things was all of the problems that DeepSync was not solving yet. And so in particular, that looked like making it as easy as possible to use that data that's historically been used primarily for direct mail advertising purposes, for things like digital activation, but also looking at some of the great products that we had as far as data hygiene, and data enrichment, and being able to make those more accessible to clients. Going back to kind of my third pillar, we had a lot of those solutions, but they weren't necessarily as readily available or didn't exist in the places that enterprise clients were storing their data. So it was a combination of those things. It was taking inventory of the products, figuring out which ones existed and were in great shape but needed to be made more accessible. And in other cases, figuring out, okay, we have the foundational asset, data asset. What do we do with that to create more value for our customers?
Okay, I like it. I'll step it back away from DeepSync for a second.
Yep.
If you think about product again, over the last, call it 5 to 10 years, is there any sort of product launch that really stands out to you as a transformational thing or something maybe you aspire to, like, wow, what they did there is blew my mind. I want to be able to do that.
Yeah, there's a lot, but keeping this focus in kind of the data and marketing industry, I would be remiss if I didn't mention something like ChatGPT, right? It's changed the game. But I think where it would actually focus is different, and that's more of a category, and that's data collaboration and data warehousing, right? Okay. If you look at how the ability to store data has changed over the last decade, from on-premise servers to the cloud to some of these data warehousing and data lake solutions, whatever you call that, it's gotten much easier to store your data somewhere and collaborate either with other parties or within different portions of your organization. And I think one of the biggest trends in how that plays into marketing is starting to kind of modularize the tech stack from a marketing point of view, meaning break up the different pieces of what you need into a customizable marketing stack. Because for a long time, and to some extent still, I think the digital advertising industry got overly complicated with all of these acronyms, things like CDPs and DMPs, and having to invest in these expensive and long-term software licenses for trying to find a platform that solves all your needs. I think in the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen more of a trend, and even less than that, honestly, towards breaking up and modularizing those capabilities so that marketers have the ability to kind of customize and build out of these blocks or these Legos their best and, a marketing stack that fits their needs, really.
Yep. I like that. But I guess it begs the question then, if you need a foundational data asset and you also have all these technology access points or outputs, et cetera, like how do you manage that? How should you think about modularizing? Because it's almost like if I go into a grocery store and I see 80 different detergents, it's almost like, I don't know where to start. Like, which do I pick? The big one, the small one, the red one, the blue one? Yep. Where do I go? It almost feels like that in the data space right now because you have a lot of data providers and you have a lot of technology providers that provide access or use of the data. So how should you think about modularizing?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the reality is it's going to differ from, customer to customer, right? Mm-hmm. Because the first thing you need to do is just understand your goals. But I think holistically, starting with kind of the foundational elements, right? And so I think data is one of those foundational elements. And so that looks like taking an inventory of what data you have in-house and what data you need, and looking for opportunities to, take that from what exists today to exactly what you need it to go. And that could look like working with a data provider like ourselves, building that foundational asset based on, offline information. It could also look like simply enriching the data that you have with additional attributes. So there's a lot kind of baked in there, but I think it's really focusing on the data as the foundation first, because having an accurate data set is always going to serve marketers well, no matter what happens in our crazy ecosystem. The second thing is there are foundational capabilities in more of what I would call the data solutions space. And I think every marketer can and should be using. A good example of that is data hygiene, right? Data ages, people move, so many things change or degrade the accuracy of customer data, even for the brands that have it. And so finding a hygiene solution, things like CAS address standardization or NCOA, which is National Change of Address, being able to make sure you have up-to-date information, you're optimizing your ad spend, and you're not wasting valuable ad dollars targeting folks who have, moved or their information has changed. I think those are just a couple foundational elements that every marketer can easily access and look into that, set them up for success going forward.
I love that. Well, what's interesting to me is that I think you're right. I think you start with your own house, clean your own house first, is the way my dad would put it. But then you look at in the marketing landscape in particular, or advertising, where you have walled gardens is a common term, but you have, in my mind, two different kinds. You have the mass market walled gardens, which are like Google, Facebook, TikTok. Yep. Then you have the retail walled gardens, the retail media places, Amazon, Walmart, Kroger, what have you. So how should brands be thinking about what you're talking about? Take care of your own house first, figure out your strategy, your goals, what types of tools and data you need. How do you combine that with the need to access and use the walled gardens of both Google and Facebook, et cetera, and then the retail media? It's a very broad question, but there's a lot of choices to make in there.
There are.
And you only have so many people, you only have so many dollars. How should people be thinking about the interaction with other walled gardens, so to speak?
Yeah, I think to me, my answer to that is actually very simple, and it's really two things. It's one, starting again with the data that you have in-house, and I'll get into why in just a second. And the second thing is not becoming too reliant on any one platform. So on the first, if you build that foundational data asset, you are positioning yourselves, regardless of what happens, what the walled gardens change. I'm certainly not against walled gardens. I think we work very closely with those platforms. They have a lot of valuable tools. There's a reason that so much advertising goes to the likes of Google and Meta and TikTok, right? And no one is saying that it shouldn't. I think what we are saying is even those platforms have a bring your own data component, and we'd encourage brands and advertisers to leverage that as much as possible, because just like there are limitations on the data that is available within those platforms, if you don't bring your own, there's limitations on what you can get back out as far as managing conversions and understanding what's actually happened in each of those channels. And so again, if your starting point is, I have my own data, I can create those audiences, I can segment my customers the way I want to, it puts you in a much better position later on when the rules change, when privacy compliance changes, or when those platforms make significant changes in the industry, like the deprecation of third-party cookies, you're still in a position to be able to leverage that data across different platforms.
Yep.
And that really plays into the second, which is just not being too reliant on any one platform. Just like anything else, I think diversification in your advertising stack, in the platforms you rely on, is critically important. And if you can do those two things, have data in-house, and be able to not be too reliant on any one platform, you're going to be in a good position no matter what happens.
Okay, I like that. I want to go back to one thing you said, because a lot of what you're referring to is more of a targeting strategy, how you target.
Yep.
But measurement is really the key to retail media side. So Google and Facebook, they're all trying to solve that. How do we closed loop, provide closed loop attribution, et cetera. But the Amazons and the Walmarts and Krogers of the world have all built multi-billion or million-dollar businesses off of that closed loop attribution.
Yep.
So how, if I'm Lindell Bennett brand, and I need to rely on these retailers to sell my goods, but they're all taking credit, or I think they're all taking credit for what I'm doing. Yep. How does investing in this foundational data asset, can that help me, in other words, with my attribution problem that I have across these retail media networks?
Yeah, absolutely, in my opinion. And I think that all just kind of resolves back to what we call identity resolution, right? Which is understanding across the different touch points that represent Lindell Bennett or Ryan Merritt, who that individual is. As a CPG, for example, to use your example, the data that I have is always going to be relatively limited because I don't have a direct interaction with those customers. Mm-hmm. By working with a company like DeepSync or a third-party data provider, you have the opportunity to kind of build that, what I would call a truth set or a nationwide CRM in-house, and understand some of those linkages that you may not otherwise have understood, right? And so if you can get any form of transaction data, which many of those retail media networks provide, you can use those exposure logs or that in-store transaction data to tie it back to your customers and get that holistic picture across all of the different grocery stores I'm working with, as opposed to being solely reliant and having the single channel view.
I love that. So, because if Lindell Bennett, me again, if I'm buying detergent one day at Costco and next on Amazon, et cetera, but I can resolve it back to Lindell Bennett, then I have a much better picture of my audience. I think that really ties it back to your initial comments around taking care of your own house first.
Absolutely. And if Lindell Bennett at Costco is represented by your name and address, Lindell Bennett at Target, for example, they may only have your email address. And even if, as the CPG, I was able to get both of those data sets, I would have no way to stitch that together without having that spine or that truth set in-house.
Yep, I like that. Well, and even think about, so I'm, not that everybody needs to know this, but Lindell E. Bennett II. There happens to be a Lindell E. Bennett I. So even differentiating, or what if I had Lindell E. as my name for legal reasons or whatever on something, my Costco membership for some reason?
Sure.
Resolving back to which Lindell is the right Lindell and how many Lindells are there becomes a critical element of that as well, right?
Absolutely, and there's lots that plays into that. Name permutations, Patrick, and that's where hygiene can come into play again, right? Is being able to understand not just different permutations of name, under past addresses, I'm sure it's the case. I haven't updated my address in Meta, for example, probably since I was in college. I have 3 addresses.
Yeah, so that's right.
It all really just ties together.
All right, I like it. Well, I've got only a few more minutes with you, and I got a couple questions related to a little game I call Ace or Daft.
Okay.
We have a resident Brit in our company named Paul Turner, who you're familiar with. For whatever reason, I've just started picking up his slang.
Yep, I love
I don't know if that's good or bad, but Ace is cool, Daft is crazy. That's the way to think about it as good Americans here.
Yep.
So give me your take on cool or crazy when I give you these terms.
Okay.
You already said one of the terms, so you stole some of my thunder here. But direct mail grade data.
Major ace. And I say that because I don't think it gets more accurate than mailable name and address information. We've talked about this before, but direct mail advertising is very expensive. And it also has a direct signal back from the consumer where people react. If you mail them something that, the mail will bounce back if they're not at that address, or people really, provide feedback if it's not something they're interested in or the name is wrong. And so I don't think it gets more accurate than direct mail grade.
Well, or Lindell E. Bennett I is actually deceased.
Exactly.
So that can have a reputational ding on you as well. If you're sending to a household where that person is deceased or in prison or something, that could be very damaging.
Absolutely.
All right, Ace or Daft, privacy sandbox.
Ooh. Conceptually ACE.
Yeah.
I think in practice right now, daft. And I say that
okay.
because the reality, well, conceptually, right, a privacy-safe environment where companies can access all of the different data they need for the marketing stack, understand the efficacy of their campaigns. Obviously, that sounds great, right? But I think the reality right now, and going back to my original product principles, is that companies and customers can't get the full extent of the information they want out of those systems. Things are aggregated. There are a lot of things at play there that make it very hard to get a view across channels and also get a true kind of individual-based approach to targeting and approach to measurement. And so for that reason, until some of those things improve, will put in the daft category.
All right, fair enough. Last one, collaboration in the cloud.
Ooh, that's a really good one. Definitely an ace for me as well. And I think that's because it plays into the modularized capabilities and kind of customizable marketing stack. A lot of companies are storing data in the cloud for obvious reasons, flexible compute, flexible storage, but you have this great opportunity to collaborate with different companies in privacy-safe ways. For example, at Cleanroom, you also have companies like Snowflake who are building marketplaces for native applications where you can perform processes like the ones we've talked about, like hygiene, on this data in a completely privacy safe, no one has to get access to the data type way, and that's a really big advancement in the industry, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's super disruptive, which leads to the last question I have for you is where do you see disruption coming from next? And it doesn't have to be like this is the big idea.
Yeah.
But as you've got hot topics like AI, we talked about retail media, cookie deprecation, on and on the list goes.
Yep.
Where do you see real disruption coming from? It doesn't have to be for any one of those, but I'll just leave it open-ended for you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that for the most part, it's the things we've talked about. And I think it's clear where a lot of the disruption in the next 3 to 5 years is going to come from. It is AI, and learning how to use that and leverage that as another tool for marketers rather than competitive to what marketers are doing. It's privacy compliance. It's increased regulations around consumer data privacy, what you can and can't do with data, and finding ways to respect that at the individual level, both in the offline realm as well as in the anonymous digital realm. Mm-hmm. And then it's this trend towards modularized kind of marketing stacks where marketers aren't beholden to CDPs and PMPs, these companies that do it all. They get to build their own. And so again, I really see all of those changes as anytime there's significant change, there's significant opportunity. Yep. And so I think it's really just being aware of those trends and using them to your advantage with all of the ways that we've talked about today.
Yeah. Well, I love what you said in the beginning about staying focused on the customer.
Yep.
How do we solve problems for people, being core to what we do? I think if you're offering a modular approach or your company can assist in that,
right,
you're helping them solve problems. You're not making them over-reliant on you even by nature of how you do it. So absolutely. I really love that. Really appreciate your time today, Ryan. Thank you for all you said.
Absolutely.
Hope everybody learned from it. Talk to you next time.